7:15 Eastern, about 15 minutes time. We are expecting the Prime Minister today to give us more details about the extension of Ottawa's emergency wage subsidy. That is the program where the government commits to 75% of an eligible company's payroll to try and get employers to rehire workers they may have laid off because of the COVID shutdowns. It's a $73 billion program. It pays $847 per week per employee, and it was supposed to run until sort of the beginning of June, but there had been an announcement it will be extended, and we're going to hear more about the details of that coming up. I'll bring in my colleagues, the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapellis, and the CBC's Catherine Cullen from our Parliamentary Bureau. So more details about this extension, which has had some uptake, but not a huge amount, given it's been open for 3 weeks. Vashi, what can you tell us?
Yeah, my understanding is the program will be extended until the end of August, and there might be some modifications as well to some of the criteria for qualifying. So right now, in essence, there are some sort of nuances to it, but basically you have to show that your revenues have dropped 30% compared to the same time last year, or at least the first 2 months of this year. And as businesses reopen in this country, we're seeing it in various provinces at various speeds. Of course, that revenue calculation might differ. So you might have not lost 30%, but 27%. And does that mean, or 25%, does that mean that you shouldn't qualify for the wage subsidy to kind of help you as you make it through this difficult time onto the other side, maybe, or at least some part of the other side of the pandemic? So my understanding is there will be some acknowledgement of that, and that the subsidy itself will be extended until the end of August. And your point, Rosie, on sort of the uptick for this, or the take-up of it, of the program so far, I think is a really significant one, and obviously has informed the government's decision to extend the program. Initially, the thought was that this program would be a whole lot more expensive than the CERB, right? That's the program that you get $2,000 a month for up to 4 months if you have to stay home and you can't work or you've been laid off because of COVID-19. This was designed to get people off that program, move them over to the CEWS, or the wage subsidy program. I have some interesting numbers. So, for example, the cost of the program was supposed to be about $70 billion, somewhere in the neighborhood of that. Only about $3.4 billion has been doled out so far. They were also expecting about 1 million applicants. They've had about a tenth of that, around 130,000. Most of those applications, shy of, I think, just 9,000 of them, have not yet been approved and money doled out. But that is a very small number compared to the CERB, for example, where there were expected to be 4 million recipients, and there's nearly double that. So I think it tells us a story about the speed at which the economy might recover, or the speed at which the economy is reopening. The anticipation probably a few months ago was that we might be further ahead than we are now. There might be more people at work and not staying home because of COVID-19, but the reality is that just isn't the case at this point. Provinces just started opening up basically this week, and so many of them are not even at that point. Ontario, for example, doesn't start opening even retail stores until next Tuesday, and there is that constant fear, of course, that if things reopen too quickly, that we might have a setback and things might have to close again. So I think people are trepidatious about going back to work in general, or about reopening their businesses. And we see that reflected in the data for these two programs. And it seems to make sense that the government would then have to extend this program as that economic reopening takes a bit longer than anticipated.
And the CERB right now is at $30 billion. So you're quite right to highlight that it is more than they probably anticipated, and that they are actively, I mean, it's the government's hope for people to move from the CERB, as you say, onto the wage subsidy if they can. But a couple of things that I hope the Prime Minister will be asked about. I wonder too, though, if it doesn't speak to, or maybe if we've been overly optimistic in thinking about how many businesses will be able to come back after what the Governor of the Bank of Canada said yesterday, that there were defaults and they were going to happen. And maybe that wage subsidy program will not be as big because there will be more bankruptcies than anticipated. And I also wonder if the CERB has, and this, well, I'll get Catherine to talk about this in a minute, but this is sort of what the Conservatives are talking about a little bit too, right? That the CERB is there and it at this point could be getting in the way of the wage subsidy. I don't mean it to sound like I don't think people should get the benefit, but they have to find a way to shift from one to the other, and I think that's the difficult space that we're in right now. Okay, Catherine, I'll get you to pick up on that point, and I'll go back to Vashi too.
Because we did just hear, Rosemary, from Andrew Scheer earlier this morning, and he really does have a laundry list of concerns about various government programs. You're right, certainly, to note the CERB, the wage subsidy. One thing that we heard Andrew Scheer saying this morning, he said he finds it completely outrageous that the Prime Minister doesn't think that sending hundreds of millions of dollars each month to fraudsters is a problem. That is probably not how Justin Trudeau would characterize his stance on this. The Prime Minister has said, and we heard him say this, frankly, get quite fiery about it yesterday, that when it comes to this program, the emergency response benefit, the priority has been to get money into the hands of Canadians so that they can pay their bills. The Prime Minister acknowledged there is going to be fraud, perhaps 1%, 2% of the program. That, though, he says, is going to be dealt with later. And we have heard from reporting from our colleagues at the National Post, things that have been confirmed by federal officials, that there is some sort of list of problematic files that is emerging in all of this. Carla Qualtrough, the Minister of Employment, one of the people in charge of this file, told Vashi the other day it is not that 200,000 number that had been put out there. But I know from my own conversations with CRA officials, there is a list of problematic files, but they are not addressing those right now. They're putting the emphasis on getting money out to Canadians. Andrew Scheer, in fact, accused the Prime Minister today of using this health crisis to remain unaccountable during all of this. He is once again calling for Parliament. He says, as Canada reopens, the House of Commons should be back. They should be having more in-person meetings. No, not with the entire 338 MPs, but still with a fuller complement in order to improve these programs, in order to hold the government to account. One more interesting note, Rosemary, something we've been asking the government about, which is how are we going to pay for all of this? The government has said, listen, we're still trying to feel out the size of this emergency. We're still dealing with it. The questions of how we're going to deal with it will come later. Well, that's sort of what Andrew Scheer had to say today, actually, when he was asked, would you tax? Would you make cuts? What would you do? He said that is a question for the next leader because, of course, he is outgoing. He's going to be replaced in August.
Yeah, probably not a good idea to box the new leader into some sort of commitment on that front. It's interesting, though, Vashi, just around the CERB. I mean, if the government had put the wage subsidy in place before the CERB, I don't know that would have been possible, given it's a much bigger program. But I wonder if that wouldn't have, I don't know, maybe that would have been more effective. Of course, hindsight's 2020. These are huge programs they're coming up with, but obviously they had to get some cash out the door quickly, and I guess the wage subsidy program is far more complex.
Yeah, I think it's from a few different perspectives. So first of all, if you lost your job or immediately, that week of March 13th, after that Friday, when all of a sudden travel was shut down, a lot of people ended up losing their job at that point or being laid off. So the need was acute at that point to be able to pay your rent 2 weeks from there. So I understand why the CERB program was rolled out when it was. But at the same time, the issue, if you talk to business owners, for example, with the wage subsidy, is probably similar to what government is grappling with, in that timelines are very unclear. So if I own a store and I don't know when I'm going to open, if it's going to be 2 months or 4 months or 6 months or a hair salon, it's very difficult to be able to assess whether or not I should be paying wages. Will I be reopened in 3 months? I mean, every business owner I hear from is covered in a myriad of questions about their own business's future. So it's not easy to be able to figure out, okay, I'm going to need the wage subsidy at this point, and then of course it ends. It's supposed to end at the end of June, and we're already a month and a half. I've lost complete track of time now. Away from that. So I don't know what the perfect mix is, but I do know that business owners are certainly, and I'm speaking more of the small and medium-sized ones. Obviously, there has been some uptick with bigger companies as well, but the majority of them are accessing less than $100,000 in these wage subsidies. I think the difficulty is in planning and figuring out the rest of your business alongside how many employees you keep on and for how long, and that's why I think to a certain extent the uptick is where it is.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the case the Prime Minister will probably make around the extension for all those reasons. That's why the extension needs to go until August. Okay, I'm going to just leave you two for just a moment as we wait for the Prime Minister and talk about, if you are also not following a calendar like Vashi and myself, and surely Catherine as well, I'll remind you that this weekend is the Victoria Day weekend. And of course, normally, in normal circumstances, we're all planning all sorts of interesting things to do outside, including going to cottages and and recreational properties out of town and trying to get them open and ready for the summer. But throngs of seasonal residents rolling into small cottage communities have triggered some real concerns, obviously, about the pandemic and areas that probably don't have the facilities to handle that. So I'm joined now by Phil Harding. He's the mayor of Muskoka Lakes, a very popular cottage area north of Toronto. Good to see you, Mayor.
Thank you and good morning.
So how are you feeling about the weekend ahead? Obviously, it's going to be very unusual, but what are you anticipating?
I'm anticipating that a number of people will be coming up. We know that the Chief Medical Officer of Health has suggested that we don't travel, but many people haven't been at their seasonal properties for 6 months and feel the need to check on them. So they will be making their way northbound, but I do believe that generally speaking, they'll be isolating at their properties.
What about, though, the rest of it? I mean, even if they come up, they check on their cottages, they stay for the weekend. What about the influx of people in terms of community spread? I mean, those people may need to get groceries, they may need to pick up things, they may want to go and get an ice cream if your ice cream places are open. What about that part of it?
So for the most part, our retail is still not open. It's not allowed to open until after the weekend.
Okay.
We do have our grocery stores are open, but they're following a number of protocols and COVID-19 protocols, same with our hardware stores. So we're encouraging those people who are coming north to make sure you bring supplies, really for this weekend or next weekend if you come up, because of the time delay to manage people under COVID protocols. You don't really want to spend your weekend standing in line to buy a loaf of bread. So if you can bring it, please bring it.
What are your concerns for the summer? I know, we were just talking there about how unknown everything is, but I would imagine much of the revenue for your town is from people that are not there, seasonal dwellers, if you will. Are you anticipating taking a financial hit because things just might be more complicated this summer?
The tourism sector to Muskoka in particular is massive, and all of our hotels right now are closed. I do believe that if they are able to open in the next couple of weeks, that we will be under a reduced capacity. So there's no question that summer 2020 is going to be vastly different. Revenues from a tourism sector, from an attractions perspective, will be down. Our concert venues will not be happening necessarily because we still won't be allowing large social gatherings. So it's going to be very different. But I do hope that it becomes more of a community-minded where people can spend time at their own properties.
What are you telling people then about coming up? Because I know that a lot of provinces are saying, enjoy your weekend in your backyard. If you don't need to go somewhere, don't go somewhere. So what is your best advice for people that want to come up there and see their beautiful homes in the beautiful region?
Certainly. So people have some significant investments in their properties and summer cottages. Many people have been up here isolating for the last 6-8 weeks since March break, for that matter. So we respect that. The one message I really want to deliver to people is that we are one community. The people who are here year round, they certainly need the seasonal people, and the seasonal people certainly need the people who are here year round. Everyone's afraid of this virus. So when you're out in public, everyone, local or seasonal, please wear a mask. Protect yourself, protect everyone around you so as not to spread this virus. I think that is number one.
Are you concerned about the going back and forth? Because this is sort of when people open cottages, but it's also when they start to move back and forth between the city and your region. And I wonder if that's a big concern, given that we know the situation is obviously worse in the GTA.
Certainly is a problem. And, again, our Chief Medical Officer of Health has said, please, unnecessary travel is not encouraged at this time. So I'm saying the same thing. A lot of close friends who will not be here enjoying cottage country this weekend to help stop the spread. But as the economy reopens and as the government tries to get things back, people are going to have to travel. We know that, but let's make sure that we sanitize the gas pumps. Let's make sure that we use, again, protective equipment when we do have to go in stores. When we walk by someone on the street, take a step back, take a step aside so as not to interfere with anyone. And that's the new socially acceptable thing to do, to step away from someone.
Yeah, it's weird, but you're right. It's what you expect now from people. Okay, Mayor, thanks for making the time for us today. I hope the weekend goes okay. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, and be safe.
Thank you, and you as well. That's Phil Harding. He's the Mayor of Muskoka Lakes, Ontario. As we wait for the Prime Minister to emerge from his home there and talk to us today about the extended wage subsidy, I'll also remind you that today is the opening day for students who have been affected by the pandemic to file for the student benefit, which has also been announced by the government. That was a $9 billion package, and I'll bring in my colleagues, Vashi Kapellas and CBC's Catherine Cullen, to talk about that. So this opens up today and should help students in some way for the next 4 months or so, Vashi.
Yeah, the idea is that if you're a student and you apply for this emergency benefit, which works, I should say, from a technical point of view, exactly like the CRB, so you should have it in your account sometime next week, you'll get $1,250 for May, June, July, and August, provided that you qualify, provided that you can't find a job, that you're looking for work, you do have to attest to that. And so that application opens today. There were, as part of that $9 billion package, and please cut me off if the Prime Minister comes on, my screen's a bit delayed. There was a host of other measures, including if you volunteer, for example, you can access a grant. The information, I've been trying to get my hands on some information about that and when the application process for that opens, because I've had a number of students reach out who do want to volunteer and get some credit for it, but they're unable to find any information about it. And I haven't got a response yet from the government, so we will put that out as soon as we get it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vashi. And here is the Prime Minister of Canada.
The last few months will have changed your daily routine in ways big and small. Canadians in every sector have faced challenges and tough choices at work. And that includes people at research institutes who are making the discoveries that keep us safe and healthy. Science and research is our door to a brighter future, and that has never been clearer. But because of the pandemic, many labs have closed or are at risk of imminently closing. So understandably, people are worried about their jobs and their future. So today, we are announcing $450 million to help researchers and research institutions bridge to better times. For universities and affiliated research institutes that have been affected by this pandemic, we will provide temporary support on wages. By delivering this money through federal granting agencies, we will get help out as quickly as possible to the people who need it.
Today, I am announcing that we will be investing $450 million to help researchers and research institutions get through the crisis. These funds will help to maintain the wages of people in conducting research so that they can continue their essential work. We're lucky because Canadian researchers are among the best in the world. Every day, they make discoveries that help us to stay healthy and safe, and we have to support them.
Far too many Canadians have lost their jobs because of COVID-19. As our economy gradually reopens, wherever we can do so safely, we need you back. We need you in your job, on your team, bringing life into our communities and our economy. That's exactly why we brought in the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy back in March. Because wherever possible, we wanted to keep you connected to the job you love and to the workplace where you contribute every day. When we launched this program, I talked about the neighborhood spots it would support, the local restaurant, the salon, the gym that had been forced to close or seen business dry up. Well, today, a lot of those places are looking towards reopening, and they need to be able to bring back workers and even hire more as this happens. So this morning, I can confirm that we will extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy by another 3 months to the end of August. Business owners, please take confidence from this announcement. You now have some runway to catch your breath as you get restarted. So please, bring back your employees. Going forward, we need to make sure that this program keeps working for people, that it keeps encouraging employers to rehire staff and even expand where possible. So over the next month, we'll work with business and labor stakeholders on any adjustments that might be needed. One of the things we'll be looking at is the 30% revenue decline threshold for eligibility. As businesses start up, needing a decline shouldn't be a barrier to growth. I know we'll figure out solutions where needed while continuing to support employers and employees, because that's who this is all about. If you're a business owner, if you're a worker, we're here for you, now and throughout the summer. At the same time, we've also broadened eligibility for this benefit. Minister Morneau will have more details shortly, but these changes will get even more people back on the job. So to business owners who haven't applied yet, go online and do so. The help is there for you.
Today, I can confirm that we will be extending the wage subsidy by 3 months until the end of August. If you are a business owner and you are preparing to reopen your business, this subsidy will be there for you and for your employees. We must ensure that the program continues to help people, that it encourages employers to rehire their workers and even extend their activities as much as possible. So, over the course of the next month, we will be working with business stakeholders and workers to make any necessary adjustments. And we will be looking in particular at the eligibility threshold, which is a decline in revenue of 30%. When businesses are ready to start up again and even expand, that threshold should not be a barrier to growth. We will also be extending the scope of the wage subsidy to encourage even more people to go back to work. Minister Morneau will have additional details about this later today. Since the month of March, we have been looking to provide more support for parents and workers, students and seniors, and for the industries hardest hit, as well as small businesses. We are helping people who need that help. And today, we are honoring those commitments.
Kicks off this year's hiring period for Canada's summer jobs. The first set of job postings are up on the Job Bank website, and thousands more will be posted over the coming weeks. If you're a student or recent grad, go to jobbank.gc.ca, that's jobbank.gc.ca, or download the Job Bank app to check it out. And tell your friends about it too. If they don't already know, there are lots of opportunities available. These placements mean a paycheck and valuable experience in jobs that are key to our fight against COVID-19. Of course, no one program can single-handedly solve the fact that there are fewer jobs out there because of the pandemic. So, for students and recent grads who still need help, starting today, you can apply for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. Go to canada.ca to sign up. For parents who receive the Canada Child Benefit and people who get the GST-HST credit, we also have more news to share today. Although everyone should do their best to file their taxes in time for the new June 1st deadline, your benefits won't automatically be cut off if for some reason you miss that date. Your CCB and GST-HST benefits will continue until the end of September. But be sure, in order to keep getting them, you need to file your taxes as soon as you can, so there's enough time for the paperwork to be processed, and you'll be able to continue receiving those benefits beyond September. Si vous êtes étudiant, assurez-vous de consulter le site web.
Do consult the Job Bank website, where we will be putting a first set of postings up today. And if you cannot find a summer job, the Emergency Student Response Benefit will be there for you. You are able to apply starting today. Everyone should try as much as possible to file a tax return by June 1st. But if you're not able to do that in time, your benefits, such as the Canada Child Benefit or the GST credit, will not stop all of a sudden. You will continue to receive them until the end of September. But we are still asking you to file your income tax return as soon as possible, so that we have the time to process your file and so that you can continue to receive those benefits after September. People are going through tough times right now, but by working together and by being there for each other, we will come out of this. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions aujourd'hui par le téléphone. Opérateur, première question. Thank you. Merci. Première question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Excusez-moi, j'étais sur silencieux. On a un peu l'impression que plus la reprise commence, plus vous avez une préférence pour la subvention salariale plutôt que la PCU. Est-ce que c'est une perception exacte? Et donc, dans ce contexte, doit-on s'attendre à ce que vous prolongiez également la PCU ou pas?
Ce qu'on sait, c'est que la
Can we
meilleure
expect
chose,
you
c'est
to
que
extend the CERB or not? The best thing is that people remain connected to their job so that they can go back to work as soon as the economy starts to reopen. And that retains that attachment between employers and their workers. Now, the wage subsidy also will give more money, in many cases, to people than the CERB. That is assistance we are providing to allow for an economic recovery. And of course, that will be an integral part of the recovery. Now, we are in a situation where millions of Canadians have lost their jobs and not receiving paychecks, and there is no possibility of their benefiting from the wage subsidy because they don't have an employer. So they are benefiting from the CERB. But the fact is that people would be able to use the wage subsidy more if employers rehire them, and they'll even be able to hire new workers as a result of that wage subsidy. And that means ensuring a quick recovery and an efficient one. Follow up? Yes, so am I to understand, you seem to be saying that the CERB will not really be extended, is that true? Well, we are looking at the fact that millions of Canadians still need the CERB. But of course, with the economic recovery and with fewer and fewer people having lost their jobs as they become rehired, I think we will be able to have more people benefiting from the wage subsidy than the CERB. But again, we will be looking at the situation very carefully, and we will be there for people who need help.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Oui. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. With
With
respect to the problems related to the CERB and the directive to ignore them, what do you intend to do about those problems? Well, I think we had a very clear choice to make at the beginning of this pandemic. Either we would try to get money into the hands of people as quickly as possible and introduce measures to detect fraud and get the money back after the fact, or we could have introduced a system that would have called for very close verifications, checks on every file before sending out any money. But we're in a situation now where people needed the money immediately. So the choice we made, and the only choice that could have been made, was to quickly get money into the hands of all those people who applied for the CERB and signed the attestation. And then afterwards, and that's what we're preparing for now, introducing measures to recollect that money from fraudsters, and they, of course, will suffer the consequences.
Straightforward choice that we had to make from the very beginning. Do we get the money out as quickly as possible to everyone who needed it, and then bring in measures that go back and create consequences and get the money back from people who took it without needing it? Or do we put in place a process that verifies carefully every application so that only those who needed it get it, and nobody had to, and fraudsters wouldn't be able to get it? Well, the problem with the second approach would have been, it would have been months before delivering to the well over 7 million Canadians who needed it the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. In this situation, in this crisis, we made the deliberate choice to get the money out the door to millions of Canadians who needed it, and bring in measures to go back go after retroactively people who might have tried to defraud the system. The response, in order to keep Canadians safe and healthy, needed to be to get them the money quickly, and that's exactly what we did. But we will ensure that fraudsters or people who got the benefits unfairly or inappropriately will have to pay them back.
En suivi, Mélanie?
Follow up.
Oui, j'en déduis, corrigez-moi si je me
So
trompe, Monsieur
I
Trudeau, mais j'en
guess
déduis que
what you're saying is that things will not change. But my follow-up question has to do with the return of Parliament. Mr. Scheer, again, is demanding a return of Parliament with a limited number of MPs. You said you didn't want that to happen. Has your position changed? Well, we now have a Parliament that meets in person once a week with a limited number of MPs who only come from a limited number of places around the country. And 2 days a week, we have virtual sessions where members of Parliament from all across the country can speak, can represent their communities. So I think this is a balance that is yielding very good results because it allows all members of Parliament to express the concerns of their regions and their constituents, not just people who happen to be close to Ottawa. At the same time, we are holding in-person sessions in a safe manner to ensure that the House of Commons continues to operate. We proposed that that continue in that way, but of course we will be working with all the opposition parties to ensure that during this crisis, or in spite of this crisis, or maybe because of this crisis, we continue to defend our democracy and our democratic institutions.
We have a system right now where Parliament sits once a week in person with a limited number of MPs who are highly concentrated around within driving distance from Ottawa, who get to actually be there in person. But 2 more virtual sessions every week where MPs from every corner of the country get to represent the concerns of their communities. That is something that has been extremely effective in making sure that we are hearing from the breadth and scope of concerns across this country and not just those folks who are within driving distance of Ottawa. We've proposed to continue that, and I know there will be discussions with the other parties on the best way to move forward, but we all agree we need to continue with a strong democracy and a functioning Parliament in a way that ensures that concerns of Canadians from every part of this country get heard.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Yeah, hello, Prime Minister. We know contact tracing is going to be key when it comes to reopening the economy. But right now, the provinces and even some municipalities are all doing this differently. When will we see a national plan for contact tracing, and what will it look like?
I was very pleased to have a great conversation with the premiers last night. It was our 9th virtual First Ministers meeting since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And as always, we're working extraordinarily well. We all understand that moving forward with a massive scale up of testing capacity right across the country and contact tracing that goes beyond our own regions and jurisdictions is going to be important, particularly as the economy starts to reopen and Canadians start to carefully travel across provincial borders and from one jurisdiction to the other. It is still important that people stay home as much as possible, even through the reopening, but there will be more travel because of a reopened economy, and we need to make sure that we do have coherence in our approach across the country on both testing and contact tracing, which is something we talked about a lot last night, and we will continue to work together on to make sure that Canadians are covered from coast to coast to coast as we control this pandemic. Okay.
Last night, we had our 9th virtual meeting with the premiers since the onset of the COVID-19 outbreak. And We are looking at an important increase in the testing capability and the contact testing across the country. That's very important, and that's the only way to prevent a future outbreak of COVID-19. So we will continue to work together so that as the economy starts to reopen, Canadians will be traveling a little more, not too much, but a little bit more. And at that point, we really must be able to properly manage COVID-19 in a new situation, and we will be working on that.
Yeah, well, what's the timeline for that plan with the Premier as Prime Minister? And also, when do you think Parliament should be expanding beyond one emergency sitting a week so it can deal with legislation other than COVID-19 matters?
First of all, we know that massive testing and effective contact tracing are going to be essential to go along with reopening of the economy. There are a number of places that are starting to look at reopening in different places, and they already know that we need to step up on our testing, on our contact tracing. The federal government is offering to work very closely with the provinces on expanding massively both our testing and our contact tracing, and we certainly hope that the provinces will work with us on that, because everywhere across the country, as we reopen, we need to be hyper vigilant to possible resurgences of COVID-19. On Parliament, I look forward to being able to deal with a broad range of subjects when the time comes. Right now, our focus is rightly almost entirely on COVID-19 and getting Canadians the support necessary to get through this first phase of the crisis, but also making sure that Canadians are properly supported through what will be a difficult and convoluted process of restarting an economy while staying safe from the further spread of COVID-19.
Thank you. Operator, last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Levan Savant, Radio Canada International. Line open.
Yes, hello, Prime Minister. On May 13th, Amnesty International sent you an open letter urging you to review your current policy and practice with the view of rendering Canada fully compliant with its international legal obligations and guidance from the UNHCR updates to the treatment of refugees. What's your response to this open letter, which was signed by people like Lloyd Axworthy and Alan Rock?
Canada has a strong tradition of protecting the most vulnerable around the world, of welcoming people fleeing persecution. They have contributed significantly to Canada's betterment and growth over the years. We have strong values of protecting the most vulnerable and being a welcoming country, while at the same time ensuring the strength and the rigor of our immigration systems and processes. We will continue to defend our values. We will continue to stay true to the way Canadians are open and welcoming while expecting the rules to be followed, and that is something that we will always do.
As a follow-up?
Yes, and so where do you draw the line between protecting the health of Canadians and fulfilling your obligations under the Refugee Convention and allowing refugees to claim asylum in Canada?
My responsibility, first and foremost, as Prime Minister of Canada, is to look out for the well-being, the safety, security of Canadians, and that will always be my top priority. However, in a situation of a global pandemic right now, we know that what we do in Canada is not going to be enough to keep us safe going forward unless we are also part of the global solution, unless we are helping out countries and people around the world in dealing with the pandemic and dealing with this situation in their ways. We will always make sure we're getting that balance right, but first and foremost, my job is to look out for the well-being of Canadians.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Mathieu Goyer de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Ça a été confirmé que des membres des Forces armées canadiennes ont contracté le coronavirus en servant dans les CHSLD au Québec. Est-ce que ça change la mission des Forces armées dans les CHSLD?
Does that change the role of the Army in these homes? And what does this mean for their colleagues? The men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces have always been ready to take risks in order to protect Canadians. They have always been there to serve in difficult times and in terrible situations. And they are again doing that in our long-term care facilities. Our responsibility as a government and a society is to ensure that we are doing everything we can to minimize the risks that members of the military face in their jobs, whether it is overseas or here at home. And unfortunately, as we all know, this is a situation where there are risks. So we will be ensuring and reinforcing any measures so that our military members stay safe as much as possible. And of course, we will need to ensure that COVID-19 does not spread within the Canadian Armed Forces. So we will be taking any necessary action to do that.
The women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have always stepped up to do difficult and dangerous things when called upon. Their service to Canada, whether it be overseas or here at home, has always been exemplary. And our responsibility as Canadians, as a government, is to ensure that we are giving them the proper support to minimize the risks that they undertake to serve Canada. There are always risks in what they do, and they go into that knowingly and willingly, and that is why we offer them our deepest gratitude every day. At the same time, we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect them, so we will look at the protocols in place and see if and how they can be strengthened, as well as ensuring that cases of COVID-19 don't spread throughout the Canadian Armed Forces and others who are serving their country.
Now,
Radio-Canada talked about a woman who is pregnant who wanted to bring her husband over the border, who is American. Now, apparently, her husband was turned back at the border. Now, how do you react to the fact that the CBSA is applying more restrictive measures than what are provided for? Well, we know it's very difficult right now for families that are separated and where people are mourning in Nova Scotia and elsewhere for loved ones or members of their family who have died in long-term care homes without being able to see them or say goodbye to them. This requires a lot of sacrifices and puts people in very difficult situations. And the border agents, like everyone else, are trying to apply the rules consistently, but there are situations that arise where, unfortunately, they've never seen that particular circumstance, and we are trying to adjust as best possible.
On the CF members contracting COVID-19, there's a veterans group that's saying that Forces members should be given the same kind of, given the danger of this deployment, they should be given the same kind of benefits they would receive, say, overseas, danger pay, things like that. Is that something that your government would be open to?
I think that is something that the Canadian Armed Forces are certainly looking at.
Okay. Can I ask you then about the wage subsidy that you were talking about today? You haven't seen businesses rehiring people at the level that you wanted. So does that say to you that there's a problem with the program, or do you think that businesses are just worse off than you thought?
I think there is a reflection that this is an unprecedented situation, and there is a lot of uncertainty about what the coming months might bring. As businesses are trying to figure out when they might be able to reopen, are looking at numbers of cases and trying to imagine what that might mean for their business in the coming weeks, in the coming months, they are busy trying to juggle a whole bunch of different factors that they have very little window into. That is why it was so important for us to announce that we will be continuing with the wage subsidy over the next 3 months until the end of the summer, to give businesses the certainty to know that we'll be there for them. As the economy reopens, there's a danger of unintended consequences. I mentioned that, for example, if part of the eligibility criteria for getting the wage subsidy is a decrease of 30% of your business, we wouldn't want people who are getting back their business going to feel like they have to hold back on their growth, on their expansion, on their rehiring in order to be able to continue benefiting from the wage subsidy. So we're going to work with industry, work with labor, work with stakeholder groups to make sure we're getting it right. But that wage subsidy is going to be a really important part of the coming months of recovery. We will continue to be there for businesses to give them the certainty to know that they can rehire their workers and get back to work in a very careful way as the economy reopens.
Hi, Prime Minister. Chris Logue with Global News. Canadians with underlying health conditions are concerned they may have to go back to work early and be putting their health at risk if the CERB isn't extended. Will there be any measures put in place that the most vulnerable to serious illness aren't put at risk?
Our focus throughout this entire pandemic has been the safety and security of Canadians. We know that some Canadians are more vulnerable to COVID-19 because of age, because of underlying health factors, and every step of the way we have focused on giving them the support we need, that they need, and we will continue to do so.
What are the specific measures on the table for those workers?
We're going to continue to look at the situations that, as they come up, as we support people who need it during this COVID-19 crisis. We've delivered the CERB to over 7 million Canadians. We've seen millions of workers get on the wage subsidy. There are measures in place for so many different groups because we know that being there for each other is part of who Canadians are, but also how we're going to get through this, and that's what we'll stay focused on. Nous savons que nous devons être là.
We know that we have to be there for each other, particularly for the most vulnerable members of our society, and that's why we introduced measures to provide funding and support for millions of Canadians, and we will continue to help them during this pandemic. Our top priority will always be the health and safety of Canadians, because without healthy Canadians, there can be no economic recovery.
CTV National News. For Canadians who have loved ones in the States, is family reunification considered essential? I mean, are they essential enough to cross that border at this point? I know that some CBSA officers are saying no to them and not letting them across. And could this be negotiated as part of ongoing border talks?
We know that Canadians are facing extremely difficult situations because of COVID-19, whether it be families who can't grieve the loss of a parent or a loved one because they cannot gather and they cannot hold funerals because of COVID-19. These are things that are extraordinarily difficult. Families are stretched across the country and unable to see each other. People are stuck overseas, and despite the hundreds of repatriation flights we've brought, there are others who simply can't come home. This is a difficult situation, but every step of the way, we need to do what is necessary right now to keep Canadians safe. That is our priority, to control the spread of COVID-19, to make sure that we get it under control in Canada and that we prevent importation from other countries. That continues to be the priority that Canada has, and I know it's difficult on Canadians, but we need to continue to be very, very careful, because if we make a wrong step in the coming weeks, everything we've sacrificed over the past 2 months could be for nothing if we see another massive surge of COVID-19. So we will continue to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful about how we move forward. Okay.
We know that these are very difficult situations for many, many families across the country that are separated from their loved ones who happen to be at the other end of the country or in another country. They cannot mourn their parents or grandparents who are in trouble in our long-term care centres, because we have to stem the spread of COVID-19. And that simply has to continue to be our priority, to do everything we can to control COVID in Canada and prevent other cases arising when we all are successful. but we must have as our top priority the protection of all Canadians.
Minister, immediate family members in the U.S. should not go to the border?
We have established rules around traveling across borders and international travel. They need to be respected because we have to keep Canadians safe. We have to control the spread, and we will be doing that.
Prime Minister, my second question is about, talks are beginning between the unions and the federal government about getting back to work. Example, Service Canada, for example, to do that safely. Do we know when that's going to happen? And I know many Canadians are struggling to find support online.
I will highlight that the federal government did not shut down. Service Canada offerings are made online or via telephone, even though we closed the physical centres. The services that the government continues to offer to Canadians continue. We've seen that in exceptional measures like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the wage subsidy or the students benefit or the seniors benefit or the fishers benefit or the list of things that the public servants in this country have continued to work on and delivered for Canadians during this crisis is extraordinary, and we need to again and again recognize and thank the incredible public servants who deliver these measures while facing the same kinds of fears and challenges, whether it's concerns about COVID-19 or dealing with working at home with a young family around. Our public servants have been exemplary through this, and we will continue to work with them and with their unions to ensure that they are kept safe as we move forward.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Friday before a long weekend. However you plan to enjoy it in these strange times. Big news from the Prime Minister today that the wage subsidy program is going to be extended until the end of August. And I'll bring in my colleagues, Vashi Capellas and Catherine Cullen, about that. So this is already being welcomed by lots of people, I have to say, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, Vashi, on Twitter, because as we were talking about, as the Prime Minister suggested there, it gives additional runway for businesses, but there were some other details as well.
Yeah, and we're anticipating even more details at around 9 minutes from now from the Finance Minister about expanding eligibility. You're right, Rosie, the big news is that it's extended until the end of August. I think from a political perspective or a policy perspective, it also gives us a real indication from the federal government that this is where they see financial aid going. This is where they see the center of economic recovery being versus the CERB. Because you heard a number of questions directed at the Prime Minister pretty bluntly. Does this mean the CERB is over? Will the CERB be extended? And there was no specific answer given there. I sort of interpreted it as this is the wage package. This is the subsidy that we are focused on going forward. The idea is to get more people back on the payroll as businesses start to reopen. That is going to be a difficult question going forward, though, for the Prime Minister, based on the uptake numbers that we were discussing right prior to his speech or to his remarks today, and that is because the uptake for the wage program at this point is not very high versus the CERB or the CERB program, which a number of people are accessing, and it's going to end. You've just applied now for your third month, then you've got your fourth month. I also, just while we were on air, had 4 different businesses reach out to me on Twitter and Instagram saying that they are having difficulty hiring people back, especially on a part-time basis, because they're accessing the CERB. And they're not saying that they'd rather have the CERB, but there are worries from their employees about the safety of returning to work, or the fact that the businesses who are hiring part-time workers back may not be able to pay those employees or are not willing to pay those employees as much as they might be making on the CERB. So there's a lot of different calculations, I think, for businesses as well as for employees that might give us sort of an indication as to why the uptake is what it is for now. And what will be really interesting to see is what changes over the next few months, especially as eligibility criteria is widened. If that 30% revenue drop doesn't have to be met to qualify, does that increase uptake as well? I think that's where the government's eyes will be. And just a final note, the employment minister had said last week to me that they will base that decision on whether to extend CERB on the uptake for the wage program as well. So they'll be looking at those numbers, and they're going to have to make a decision pretty soon. If you think that in a month people will have to apply for their last $2,000, the rubber will hit the road for them, and they're going to have to figure out, does it get phased out? Does it work more like EI? Does it stay the way it is and get extended, or does it get cut off completely? And a lot of those decisions are going to be based on what happens with this wage subsidy.
Yeah, and I will say that some of the details we're expecting from the finance minister have already been put out in a release, but so it has broadened this program in a big way to include, for instance, partnerships that are up to 50% owned by non-eligible members. It also will now apply to non-public colleges and schools, including places that do arts and languages, because that was a problem for I don't know if it would include like ballet schools that had been a problem for them. So they're obviously seeing problems, addressing them, and broadening it out as they go. And we'll hear more about that from the finance minister in a moment. I'll bring in Catherine too, because as we were on air, there was some news about Canadian Forces members who are doing work in long-term care centres in Quebec. Catherine.
Yes, that some of them have fallen ill with COVID-19, although I don't believe, Rosemary, that we got a specific number. And so it was interesting to see the Prime Minister talking about that, saying that it is work that involves risk, that they try to minimize those risks, that they will look at the protocols to try to minimize that risk further. Also interesting to see a very sort of curt answer from him when he was asked about the prospect of offering danger pay for work here domestically in Canada in those long-term care facilities, saying that the Canadian Forces would be looking at it. Another thing I thought was quite interesting in terms of a change of tone was really struck today around that issue of the emergency response benefit, about how the Prime Minister's language has changed, him and his officials, over the course of the past couple of weeks. Initially, when we started asking these questions about people accessing the emergency response benefit who do not qualify, the response we got again and again from the Prime Minister, from Minister Carla Qualtrough, was Canadians are honest. We believe in the honesty of Canadians. When I first asked Carla Qualtrough about reports that some people were accessing the program who don't, and whether she'd heard that, she said, I've heard it anecdotally, but honestly, I kind of reject that. I believe that most Canadians are honest. Today, you heard the Prime Minister repeatedly using the term fraudsters, certainly defending the approach that his government has taken on this, but they are really emphasizing now that they are planning to crack down more later.
Yeah, okay. Two things I wanted to mention. Just the $450 million for researchers in hospitals, because it came out of some reporting that our colleague Tonda McCharles did at the Toronto Star, where she highlighted again a group of people, medical researchers, who are not paid from the public sector, but they sort of fall under a weird category. So the government has moved to make sure that those people who can't qualify for the wage subsidy but are doing important research for things that we need right now will get support on wages, $450 million for them. I'm going to leave you both just a moment as we wait for that press conference to start at the top of the clock, because one of the points that Vashi highlighted there about business owners struggling to get some of their employees to come back is demonstrated in our next guest, and that is Laura McNutt. She owns a small business, and she joins us now from Halifax. Good to see you, Laura.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So you have a vintage clothing store. It looks cool behind you there. Tell me how you are doing, and what kind of support you've been able to access from the government.
Well, we're a very tiny business, and a lot of the loan programs have not applied, and for the most part, I've had to lay off my staff, my sole staff, and I was very interested in the Prime Minister's delivery this afternoon with respect to the wage subsidy and potential extension, and that looks like it might be something that I could take advantage of, because as you've said, the CERB, which served to compensate and effectively reward us for staying home to mitigate transmission, my staff got a raise in taking that CERB, so it certainly has been challenging.
So do you? I mean, the CERB has not been extended, I guess is maybe what people are thinking here. So if you could use the wage subsidy, you would be able to get those employees back. Do you think that will be enough to get them to come back, or will they delay coming back because, as you point out, they're making more on the CERB?
Well, I was really hoping that there was a facility that would allow us, retail and other businesses who need to provide some kind of we have to install elements and strategies to have a safe environment, and staff would be really helpful. And if we could have some kind of compensation for that while they're still having the CERB benefit, or at least a portion of the CERB benefit. So that flexibility would be really, I think, welcome by a lot of businesses. You know, it is, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's my fault. I had a couple people on Twitter also say, for smaller businesses like your own, this is great, but I don't even know that I have the 25% to pay my employee. Would that be the case for you?
Absolutely. You know, it really, we're all hamstrung and very concerned about, you know, the appetite for revenue, even in terms of retail. Are people going to come and shop? You know, there are so many questions. It's such a dynamic situation, and yeah, we're all nervous and we're taking risks. With respect to that 25%, I personally, in my business, I'm trying to generate online sales, but that in itself is an extremely challenging thing for a business that's based on a brick and mortar model.
The fact that this subsidy program has been extended now till the end of August, the Prime Minister said there that this is to allow you some runway to catch your breath. Will it do that for you?
It certainly helps, and every business is different, and I really applaud the attempts to support all of our varied businesses, and I mean it's a monumental task. So I'm really grateful, sincerely, for what appears to be available. In some, I mean it's causing a lot of extra effort on our parts as business owners, but we can't blame. We can't. This is out of our hands, and whatever assistance we can get is wonderful.
Okay, Laura McNutt, nice to meet you. I hope it all works out, and good luck to you.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Okay, that's Laura McNutt. She owns a cool vintage clothing store there in Halifax. All right, so we also found out, of course, today that the student benefit opens up today as well for post-secondary students. You can go online and start applying for that emergency aid benefit. And we've reached one student now. Brandon Amiot is in Orillia, Ontario, a student at Lakehead University. Good to see you, Brandon.
Miigwech for having me.
So have you applied, I guess, for the benefit? Where are you at?
6 a.m. this morning, bright and early, I was up to apply when the portal opened.
Great. And any problems?
No, it was pretty smooth sailing. In my case, I don't have a CRA My account. I preemptively called the CRA to figure out how I could go about that. In my case, I ended up having to contact my bank, my financial institution, to set up direct deposit to make it easier. And other than that, I was in and out fairly quickly on the portal this morning.
Okay, good to know. Now, there was supposed to be something on the portal that would direct you to a job bank, or at least say that you know that there was a possibility you would be looking for a job. Did you see anything like that on the portal?
In the attestation, it did mention a piece about looking for work. However, I was a little surprised to find that there was no, I wasn't directed to a job portal. That said, I did also go and register for the Government of Canada's Job Bank the other day, just in case that would be a requirement. And I'd encourage other students to look on there too. That said, and I'm sure we'll touch on this, there are some concerns around the follow-up on that attestation and what that will look like for students.
Yeah, the Prime Minister mentioned today that there are some the summer job bank is now open. So you're quite right. There are some possibilities there for students who are going to look for work. Just tell me about I imagine you qualified for the $12.50 benefit. How does that factor into keeping you going, paying for things? I don't think you can save money on $12.50, but just give me a sense of how that will help you.
Well, for myself, I barely made May rent, so this will help a lot in the months coming forward. And of course, with food, I know for students, it'll vary based on the food costs if they live in the north or rural communities, or housing costs if they live in larger cities like Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. But for myself, it'll definitely it'll help cover the basics and hopefully alleviate some of the anxiety and stress I've had to deal with not having the employment I usually have during the summer.
Yeah, and will you then, so I guess you can make up to $1,000. You can also do some volunteer work and get some money that way. Will you pursue either of those things, or are you really going to try and look for a part-time or full-time job so that you can get off the benefit?
I'm definitely keeping my options open. One of the challenges for myself being in cottage country is that a lot of the industry I normally work in is contract work in the culture and tourism industry.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've lost a lot of that in my area. So I'm probably going to be looking more towards volunteering. It'll really just depend on what becomes available. And for me, it's about making sure that my health is not compromised in the work that I'm doing, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, that's a good thing to think about. So you said you were stressed out. How are you doing? How are you feeling about things now? I mean, we're all sort of feeling the same way, but how are you feeling after today?
I'm feeling a little better. I think that, I still have some concerns. A lot of my friends still don't qualify because they're international students or recent graduates who graduated between September and December 2019. So, students who are organizing around this issue are still pushing to try and include them in some way, whether it be through the CESB or elsewhere. And I know that there are still some concerns for other students around whether that $1,250 is going to be enough for the month, depending on where they live or their costs. And the other thing that's kind of nerve-wracking for myself and others is what is the reporting going to be like on the other end of this program?
Okay, Brandon, Emia, good of you to make the time for us today in Orillia, Ontario. I'm glad you're feeling like 5% less stressed out. That's good.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon. As always, we are here with all of your COVID-19 updates from health officials and cabinet ministers. Today, we're expecting the Deputy Prime Minister, and as the Prime Minister referenced there, we're also going to hear more from the Finance Minister today about the broadening of the wage subsidy criteria to apply to many more organizations and companies as the government starts to wrap its head around, the fact that this is taking longer probably than any of us anticipated. And so the program now extended until the end of August and trying to catch up more people that we're not going to have access to it. We'll bring that to you in just a few moments until I see there's two ministers there just waiting remotely for their colleagues to enter the room. Until they do, I'll bring back my colleagues, the CBC's Vashi Kapelas and Catherine Cullen, to talk a little bit more. So I thought the business owner, Laura, that was interesting because it's an exact example, I think, of some of the concerns the Conservatives have been raising. When you have an employee who made less than the CERB, now on the CERB, and Laura wants her to come back and she wants the wage subsidy, but anyway, it's very complicated, and it does show that it may be difficult to transition people from that emergency benefit onto a wage subsidy, particularly if you're not, paid as much in your actual job, Vashi.
Yeah, I think it was completely emblematic of all of the issues I think that business owners face in making a decision about what kind of financial aid they try to access, if they are able to access it. And I think a couple of sort of questions jumped in my head listening to the interview. The first is, if the government signaled the CERB was going to end very clearly, would that make a difference in the decision that employees make? At the same time, can they signal that at a time when not every employee is able to be rehired and they may be needing to access that kind of aid beyond the next 2 months? And then third, if they do signal that the program as it stands is going to end, but that there will be some sort of incentive built into work, i.e. you won't lose it all money, all aid from the government, but you can balance that out with wages from your employer, will that make a difference? I think those kinds of decisions can't be made too long from now, only because of people like your guest there, right? Those are decisions that she has to make right now. And they will also really factor into whether or not that business can survive. And so the government is going to have to signal pretty soon what they plan, I think, to do with the CERB, even though they've been saying we're still in this really acute phase where they can't. And so I'll be looking for that for sure.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. Okay, I'm going to take you back now to the press conference, if you don't mind. The Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is probably giving us introductions on how this will unfold. Let's listen in.
And by video link, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains, and also by video link, the Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau. And of course, our Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu, is here as well to answer questions. Dr. Tam, please.
Good afternoon, bonjour à toutes et à tous. I will start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 73,829 confirmed cases, including 5,499 deaths, and 36,528 cases, or 49%, have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1,232,000 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 6% of these testing positive overall. We're now testing an average of 26,000 to 28,000 people daily. These numbers change quickly and are updated regularly on canada.ca/coronavirus. With many areas of the country continuing to show decreased COVID-19 activity, and the Victoria Day long weekend just ahead of us, getting outside is top of mind. By the same token, there are many Canadians who are concerned about how we can go about these next weeks and months safely. This is a very reasonable concern. The reality is that COVID-19 is still out there, and it will be with us for the foreseeable future. So as local authorities continue to slowly reopen recreational, social and economic spaces, the right and safest way to go out is to go out smart. This means not dropping the vital layers of protection that we've used to plank the curve and by now have well ingrained as our hygiene habits. Going out smart means keeping 2 meters of physical distancing from others wherever and whenever possible, avoiding touching common surfaces and cleaning our hands well and frequently. And depending on the COVID activity in your area, local authorities may recommend the use of non-medical masks or facial coverings as an added layer of protection for when it is not possible for you to maintain a 2-meter distance from others, for example, when using public transit. However, in some instances, going out is not okay. We all have a responsibility to do things to keep others safe and to not risk a setback on the progress we've made. That means covering every cough and sneeze. But for those who are experiencing even mild symptoms consistent with COVID-19, it also means staying home and staying apart from others. So no matter where we are this long weekend, going out should only be an option if we can go out smart. Living with COVID-19 means we've got to maintain our habits of physical distancing, frequent hand washing, and staying home if sick. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tam. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à Dr. Howard New. Dr. New, s'il vous plaît.
I'll now give the floor to Dr. Howard New. Dr. New. Good afternoon. As usual, I'll start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 73,829 confirmed cases, including 5,499 deaths and 36,528 recovered. To date, labs across the country have tested 1,232,000 people for COVID-19, with about 6% of those testing positive overall. We are now testing an average of 26,000 to 28,000 people daily. These numbers do change quickly and are updated regularly on canada.ca/coronavirus. With many areas of the country continuing to show decreased COVID-19 activity and the Victoria Long Day weekend just ahead of us, getting outside is top of mind. By the same token, there are many Canadians who are concerned about how they can go about these next weeks and months safely. This is a reasonable concern. The reality is that COVID-19 is still out there and will be with us for the foreseeable future. So as local authorities continue to slowly reopen recreational, social, and economic spaces, the right and safest way to go out is to go out smart. That means not dropping the vital layers of protection that we've used to plank the curve, and by now have well ingrained as our hygiene habits. Going out smart means keeping 2 meters of physical distancing from others wherever and whenever possible, avoiding touching common surfaces, and cleaning our hands well and frequently. And depending on COVID activity in your area, local authorities may recommend the use of a non-medical mask or facial covering as an added layer of protection for when it's not possible for you to maintain a 2-meter distance from others. For example, when using public transit. However, in some instances, going out is not okay. We all have a responsibility to do things to keep others safe and to not risk a setback on the progress we've made. That means covering every cough and sneeze. But for those who are experiencing even mild symptoms consistent with COVID-19, it also means staying home and staying apart from others. So, no matter where you are this long weekend, going out should only be an option if we can go out smart. Living with COVID-19 means we've got to maintain our habits of physical distancing, frequent hand washing, and staying home if sick. Thank you.
Merci, Dr. Knu. And now we will hear from our Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains. Nav, please.
Thank you very much, Christia. Over the past month, our government has been working hard to make sure that all Canadians can keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. We've made changes to our employment insurance program, introduced the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and provided a wage subsidy for business owners to avert layoffs. Today, we're announcing a new program that will provide temporary support for Canada's research talent, help sustain research capacity at universities and health research institutes during these extraordinary times. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons un programme temporaire.
Minister Bains, today we are announcing a new program that will provide temporary support for Canada's research talent and help sustain research capacity at universities and health research institutes during these extraordinary times.
Canada's universities and health research institutes employ tens of thousands of highly qualified research personnel. I'm talking about the researchers, lab technicians, trainees, and other support personnel who are the driving force for Canada's research in both universities and health research institutes like the Sick Kids Research Institute in Toronto and the Montreal Clinical Research Institute. These people are significant drivers of innovation. They generate the discoveries and inventions that help people and the economy. Many of these very researchers have the expertise we need to help us better understand COVID-19 and how to fight it. But these highly qualified personnel are at risk of being laid off right now. Non-government sources of revenue like private sector contracts, charitable donations, and endowments, which account for much of the income that funds the research activities of universities and health research institutes, are drying up due to the COVID-19 crisis. To help them, we will be providing up to $450 million to help sustain the academic research community through the crisis caused by COVID-19. Nous annonçons jusqu'à 450
Minister Bains still speaking. To help them, we will be providing up to $450 million to help sustain the academic research community through the crisis caused by COVID-19.
Universities, health research institutes, eligible for federal granting funding, are also eligible for this program in support of their research-related activity. In addition to providing wage support for research personnel, this investment will also help universities and health research institutes cover the unanticipated costs associated with maintaining research assets at risk due to the pandemic, and ramping up research activities once physical distancing measures are relaxed and ultimately lifted. Cet investissement s'ajoute aux mesures que nous avons mises
Minister Baines, this investment is in addition to measures we have put in place to maintain jobs and excellence in science and research in Canada.
Absolutely critical that we support and retain our research talent, not only because they are Canadians that need our help right now, but also to ensure that our universities, health research institutes have the talent and knowledge necessary to support post-pandemic economic recovery. 2 years ago, we made the single largest investment in fundamental research in Canadian history. That is because this government recognizes the value of the work done by scientists and researchers in this country. And it is in that spirit that we stand with them today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you very much, Nav. And I will just ask our technicians perhaps to turn up the volume if you can. It hasn't been a perfect transmission. And Bill, I will ask you if you don't mind to speak a little bit slowly because the transmission is, there's a little bit of static on it. So I think if you speak slowly and we turn up the volume, our chances of understanding every word will be improved. Okay, so now we're going to hear from our Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. Bill, please.
Well, thank you, Christia. I think, as we all know, we've been working hard over the last months to protect jobs. We introduced the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to do just that. To date, the wage subsidy is helping almost 2 million workers across Canada, and thousands of applications are being received every single day. While provinces are slowly starting to change away from lockdown procedures, we know that businesses continue to need support to keep workers on payroll, or even to rehire them as things pick up. That's why our government has announced that we will extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to August 29th, 2020. We plan on consulting with businesses and labor representatives over the course of the next month, and any potential adjustments that we make following the consultation period, including possible adjustments to the revenue decline threshold, will seek to promote jobs and promote growth. Notre gouvernement a annoncé son intention de prolonger la subvention salariale.
Our government has announced its intention to extend the wage subsidy benefit to August 29th. We will be consulting with various stakeholders in the month to come. We will be making adjustments, including potential adjustments to the revenue decline threshold to promote jobs and growth.
So that more workers at more organizations can benefit from the wage subsidy. New regulations are effective immediately and retroactive to March 15. Wage subsidy is now available to registered journalism organizations and all registered Canadian amateur athletic associations. This includes Hockey Canada, Lacrosse Canada, and others. Also eligible now are tax-exempt Indigenous-owned corporations and partnerships that include Indigenous governments and eligible employers. This will ensure more Indigenous employers can support their workers. And non-public colleges and schools are now eligible, including driving schools and language schools, and art schools, which foster Canada's world-class talent, like the National Ballet School, for example. Wage subsidy will also be available to partnerships with non-eligible members, as long as the non-eligible members are not majority owners. Nous faisons aussi des changements afin que plus de travailleurs.
We are also making changes to ensure that more workers can benefit from the wage subsidy. New regulations will come into force immediately and will be backdated to March 15th. The subsidy is also available to journalism, amateur sport associations, non-public colleges and schools, including language schools and driving schools.
We also intend to propose legislation to provide greater flexibility for employers to use the wage subsidy to rehire and support workers who may not have been regular employees in the early months of this year, but are nonetheless important to operations. Workers like seasonal employees. Nous avons également l'intention de faire des modifications législatives.
We also intend to make legislative changes to give greater flexibility to employers for the use of the subsidy. And as a result, they will be able to hire back workers who were perhaps not regular employees during the first months of this year, as was the case with temporary foreign workers.
The subsidy applies appropriately to corporations formed on the amalgamation of two predecessor organizations. My message to employers remains the same. We hope that you apply to this program and rehire your workers. While much remains unknown, there's one thing that I do know. Workers drive our economy. By making sure that they have jobs to go back to, we're making sure that Canada stands ready to recover. Thank you very much. Back to you, Christian.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Nous sommes maintenant prêts à répondre à vos questions. Carl, s'il vous plaît.
We're now prepared to take any of your questions.
As usual, we'll start with 3 questions on the phone, 1 question, 1 follow-up, and then we will turn to the room. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question, la première question, est de Mélanie Marquis de la Presse. À vous la parole.
Merci. Bonjour, ma première question.
Question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. My question is for Mr. Morneau. Let me start over. How much will the expanded wage subsidy program cost with the expansion that you're proposing? Minister Freeland. Go ahead, Mr. Morneau. Mr. Morneau, this is an important question. We are ensuring employers that the wage subsidy will be available until the end of August. This is important for their planning. As I said, we are going to be considering adjustments. Today, I cannot say specifically or precisely what our estimates are, but when we have more information, we will provide the appropriate figures. Question. On a different subject, again for Minister Morneau, with respect to health transfers to the provinces. You know, as I do, that the health budgets will be exploding with the situation we're currently facing. Are you open to increasing health transfers to the provinces?
And Bill, before you answer that question, there's a request here from the reporters in Ottawa that you repeat your reply to the first question in English, please.
So I have to remember my reply to the first question? Is that it? The first question was about the wage subsidy and our expectations on costs. And as I mentioned, first and foremost, we want to give assurance to businesses that the wage subsidy will be extended to the end of August. That gives them the ability to rehire workers to do their planning with some sense of security. That said, we are looking to potentially make adjustments to the program to make sure it encourages hiring. So with those adjustments, which we are going to consult on, still to come, I can't yet make precise estimates on the costs, the implications. Pour la question au sujet de notre approche de travailler avec les provinces.
With respect to our approach for working with the provinces, clearly, there will be costs. We will be facing difficulties because of COVID-19, and the cost for our healthcare system will be very significant. It will be subject of our discussions. In discussions with the provinces, we will look at how we can work together. This remains a situation with the provincial and federal jurisdictions. But of course, we will be holding discussions, and we will be working together to ensure that our system works and that we have sufficient funding to continue to face COVID-19.
Thank you, Minister.
The Deputy Prime Minister, and I could also add that the question of cost in the fight against COVID-19 is something that was discussed by the Prime Minister and the provincial and territorial leaders yesterday night. The Prime Minister stated once again that the federal government is there to help the provinces and territories with their work to fight COVID-19, including on very important issues such as testing. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Operator, the next question.
The next question is from Mike Blanchfield from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. This question is for Dr. Tam and perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister as well. Given the discussions with the provinces on stepping up a more coordinated approach on contact tracing and its importance, obviously, in rebooting the economy, what is the urgency? What urgency do you feel about getting a national plan in place to deal with contact tracing? And when do you see that taking shape? And what will it look like?
Yes, so contact tracing is one of the absolute cornerstones of our public health strategy going forwards. Contact tracing is, of course, done at a local level with support as needed from the provincial and federal levels. So I think from and in general, that is done by public health staff or officials, augmented now by some of the increased capacity that have been put in place by different jurisdictions. Some of them have hired, say, students and other surge capacities as well. The federal government is we are offering additional support as needed on that front. There have been a number of discussions about technological applications. There are some jurisdictions that have began to try some of this and sharing some of the lessons. I do know that there's been further discussions, I think, at the ministerial level.
Yeah, and I can just add, Mike, it's a really good question, and as you will have seen in the readout from the call between the First Ministers last night, testing and contact tracing and working together on that was one of the main issues discussed. There was a real enthusiasm of all of the First Ministers and, of course, of the Prime Minister for us as a country to really continue to step up testing and contact tracing, and a real shared recognition that doing that is very important as we look towards reopening our economy. There was some discussion of the collaboration that is already happening. For example, this week, the federal government has been working with Ontario to provide some specific support, just some people on contact tracing, and that's going well. And then Premier Moe made a point, speaking on behalf of the Council of Federation, which people really agreed with, which is as we reopen the economy, we are going to see more Canadians traveling between provinces. And so there will be more of a need for us across the country to collaborate on contact tracing. That was a point that the premiers raised. And so we did talk about ways that we're all going to need to work even more closely together on that.
Follow up,
Christia, if I may.
Please, Nav.
Thank you very much. Just to quickly add on what Christia said with respect to contact tracing, one other element that's very important is not only are we working with the provinces and territories, not only are we engaging with different organizations, but privacy will be central. The architecture around privacy principles will be a key feature of any tool that we work with and move forward on. So I wanted to highlight the importance of making sure that as we look at other jurisdictions, We want to be driven by a Canadian solution based on Canadian values, and privacy will be front and center.
Mike, follow up.
Yeah, okay. For the Deputy Prime Minister, U.S. media reports indicate the Trump administration wants its border restrictions to have an indefinite timeline. Are they asking for that current non-essential travel, the ban between Canada and the U.S., are they asking it to be extended beyond June 21st? And if so, is Canada pushing back on that?
So as you know, Mike, I never think it's a good idea to disclose private negotiations. I think it's never good to negotiate in public. But let me just assure Canadians that decisions about the Canadian border are going to be taken by Canadians in the Canadian national interest, with the health and safety of Canadians first and foremost. Our government is taking a very prudent approach, and in that, the Canada-U.S. border was discussed by the First Ministers yesterday also, and there was, I would say, a widely shared view expressed by the premiers that taking a prudent approach right now is the right thing. We are actively discussing with the United States what to do next on the Canada-U.S. border. It is a very, very collegial and very friendly conversation. And I think it would be absolutely fair to say that both sides feel the current measures are working really, really well in restricting non-essential travel, but also really importantly for both countries in ensuring that essential travel continues. And that will be particularly important as we look towards the reopening of our economy for areas like the auto sector, for example. So the essential travel is still happening. Both countries feel very comfortable with that.
Okay, I'm going to pull away just briefly from this briefing, which you can continue watching on cbc.ca/politics. We will come back to it in just a moment, but want to get to some other news that about the Canadian military. We heard from the Prime Minister and from representatives of the Canadian Forces that there has been a number of members, and we'll try and get some answers here, who have been affected, who have contracted COVID-19. They are, of course, in a number of long-term care centres in Quebec, lots of them in Quebec, more than, I think we're up to about 25, and 5 in Ontario, to help the staffing of those long-term care centres, and are in there as support mechanisms. Brigadier General Gervais Carpentier joins me now to discuss this deployment and the latest news about some of the forces members. Good to see you, Brigadier General. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Ms. Barton.
So tell me what you can about the Canadian Forces members who have contracted the virus. If you have a number, that would be helpful.
If I may, at first, I'm happy to be here. We have more than 1,000 soldiers, some medical professionals, and general support troops that are operating on those 25 long-term care facilities. Obviously, no missions are without any risks. I'm not at liberty to talk to specific numbers, but numbers are very low. And we knew up front that this was a part of the risk for our forces. And like any Canadians at this time, be it on that assistance mission or just as being a Canadian, there's a risk of being infected.
Sure.
But much the important part of our preparations was to make sure that we knew how to don and wear that personal protective equipment to ensure max safety for personnel.
Can I ask you about that personal protective equipment? Was the same kind of PPE given to each member of the forces, or was it different depending on where they were deployed? Because, of course, some long-term care centers are in a much more serious situation than others.
So the PPE, the personal protective equipment, is definitely aligned with the conditions in the center. So we have our air care professional in the Canadian Forces. We are ensuring that proper measures are followed, and that our troops, like the provincial health professionals, are wearing what's appropriate to the conditions with the conditions that they're operating in.
Can I ask you again now about testing? Obviously, I don't know if you're testing are you testing everyone that is going into the homes? Are you testing based on symptoms?
So different situations with different centers, but again, following protocols which are well defined and in line with health professionals. So everybody that went through the deployment process went through a screening, a medical screening. And then during the assistance in the centers, depending on the situation in some of the centers, some situations are more dire, and then there might be some of our members that are tested, but if not, it goes through a screening process.
I was just going to say, are they tested like on a daily basis as they're going in and out, or are they tested if they're in some of those very dire situations, as you point out?
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of specifics with that. I think what's key to highlight here is that we have very thorough process. Again, Canadian Armed Forces healthcare professionals that are working with provincial healthcare professionals to make sure that our folks are well protected, well tested. The way we're approaching the assistance mission is we're bringing form groups, between 30 and 40 into those long-term care facilities, and the idea is that we're dedicated to that center. So it prevents us going from places to places, which brings safety to a higher level. In those long-term care facilities, we're doing a lot of different work. Some focused on the patient themselves, providing assistance in the caring of patients, feeding them, changing bedding, making sure that they're clean. But there's also a number of logistical tasks that our folks are taking on, be it food or cleaning, and even some planning or managerial actions where there are gaps in some of the centers. So it's a tough situation. We never wish for this type of situations, but we're proud of the work that we're doing and committed to assisting our provincial partners.
I know it's difficult work, and I certainly know Canadians appreciate it, particularly in the provinces where you're deployed. And I've been wanting to talk to someone about this because it is so important, and I appreciate you all stepping up to do this. Have you now had to isolate other members of the forces because you have a couple of cases? We've heard 3 cases, just to be clear. You have a few cases now. Have you had to pull anybody out of their deployment and isolate more people? Can you give me a sense of how that's being dealt with?
So again, a deliberate process, and as part of if somebody is identified suspected or tested positive, then there's I might struggle with the English term, but epidemiologic analysis, which determines what needs to be done with the rest of the team. So it might mean that in some cases, other folks will be put in isolation, or in most of the situations, because our folks have been well trained and they are wearing the personal protective equipment, then the rest of the team is safe and can continue on with providing that much required assistance.
So has that happened yet, or you're not sure?
No, it is. So like I said, I'm not at liberty to talk to numbers, but some folks have been either on Operation Laser, or which is that assistance mission, or just in normal business, have been infected. Very low numbers, but again, that process that I just talked about is done so that we ensure safety and protection of our force, so that when those assistance mission come our way, we're ready to bring our troops and deploy and provide that assistance.
You'll forgive me for, again, trying to be specific when you might not be able to be, but that's what I have to do as part of my job. We have heard that there was a case at Vigie Montréal, which is one of the hardest hit CHSLDs in Montreal. Is there anything happening at that CHSLD now that would be different because of a potential case there?
So, Vigie Montréal was covered, I guess, greatly in Atlanta in the news.
Yes.
Obviously, a difficult situation there, and so the measure that was taken is the wearing of personal protective equipment. The grade has been upgraded. And the whole center is basically considered a hot zone. Yes. So with those measures in place and analysis by the analysis to determine what could be the cause, then we're ensuring proper safety of our folks. So we're still in there operating with proper protection measures and mitigating measures. To provide that care to those patients that really require it.
Are any of the cases of COVID with the members are they serious or are they stable? Can you give me a sense of just how they're doing?
So we are our forces are fit, younger, and again as part of that screening, that much required preparation. Deliberate process to ensure that when we launch into that assistance mission, we have the folks that are prepared and fit for that job.
Right.
That's part of ensuring that we're mitigating risk in a mission of assistance that again is not without risk. And just like the other provincial healthcare professionals are facing some risks every day. I'd like to sort of maybe highlight the work and the teamwork between those provincial healthcare professionals and our members from the Canadian Armed Forces. I was visiting a center the other day and was told that one of the ladies there, one of the nurses, had been working for 40 days straight. So this is why we're there. This is why we're taking the proper protective measures. Again, not without any risks, but very deliberate approach, very serious approach, so that we can be there alongside our provincial partners and that we can take care of those patients that required, so that where required we can bring dignity, the proper level of dignity back in those centers.
Last question to you. The Prime Minister was asked today whether Forces members should be receiving some sort of danger pay for this mission. Do you know if that's happening or if it's being considered?
We're always proud to launch on operations. That's our role. We're there to protect Canadians, defend the nation, at home and abroad. If more money comes as part of it, then people will be happy. But I'm not sure where the policies are on that. But this is not what motivates us. It's that ability for us in Quebec is to be there with those Quebecers that require it.
Well, it is important work, and I'm sorry that it had to be a couple of cases that gave us a chance to speak with you about it, but I am glad that you did that, and I know Canadians are very grateful to you and to all your fellow members for stepping up in this way. Brigadier General Gervais Carpentier in Montreal, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thank you. Have a great day.
And you too. Stay healthy. All right. Wanted to get to that because it was a little bit of breaking news. We'll take you back now to Ottawa, where federal ministers and public health officials are still speaking.
Can we ask some other questions?
Just like some free shots on goal. I think that we have to let our reporter friends ask more questions if they wish.
Minister Morneau is back on.
Bill, can you say a few words, Bill, just so that we can see if we can hear you?
Okay. Clearly, Bill can't hear us, so.
Looking very relaxed. Little does he know we read lips.
I think we'll just pause and resume in a few minutes.
So Kelsey, Julie, Mike, if you guys have another question or two, you can ask one.
I have a curiosity. If we have time, I'm wondering how Dr. Tam, you suggest to those who are working in essential services and who have been working very long hours for the last couple of months to keep the economy going and to maintain the healthcare system, how do you deal with the potential of burnout and avoid that?
I'm sure Minister Haiju, who's very much a supporter of maintaining mental health, will have something to say. Is absolutely a major issue for sure. I think healthcare workers have been working this long hours, not just healthcare workers, many other essential services, people who keep many supplies going. And I think there are many programs set up for employees. If you're part of those programs, take the most advantage of it, for sure. The minister may want to talk about the sort of suite of applications that we have, but it is really difficult. I mean, it's a matter of individuals being supported by their families, by their communities, by the work environment they work in, as well as getting help when needed. I have to say, as a health worker and perhaps someone who's been working many hours, we're not very good sometimes at asking for help. I know doctors are not very good at all in spotting our own, health needs. So I think we also need to be able to tell our colleagues. I always say to my staff, if I'm behaving strangely, would you please tell me, because I might not actually know myself, and behaviors out of the ordinary for me affects how everybody else works in my team. So I think partly a few days earlier, I think during sort of Mental Health Week, I said, you got to kind of talk about how you feel, which is not easy for many. Health workers in particular feel that they have to help others and sometimes neglect to sort of help themselves. So we have to be aware of that as well.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I'm told we now have Minister Baines and Minister Morneau on the phone. So Kelsey, follow up.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the patience. Minister Morneau, if you could please repeat the figure that you gave for the total amount of stimulus, that would be much appreciated as the line cut out. And then as a follow-up, we're wondering, you have said that there is, it's too early to give a fiscal update or budget at this point, but one of your finance officials told the committee this week that there was work ongoing on a fiscal update, so I'm just wondering how you jive those two positions.
Well, thank you. And I can hear you clearly now. I hope you can hear me clearly.
It's much better. Thank you.
So I was responding to your first question around the scale of our direct support. And as I reported to the Finance Committee in the House of Commons yesterday, the report on the direct support is at $151.7 billion. Obviously, enormous support for Canadians as we try to get through this time, and significant support for businesses to find a way to get across a difficult period. With respect to the provision of information, obviously we are being transparent as we announce new programs to make sure we give a sense of the expectations of the cost of those programs. You heard one of my finance officials this week talk about our need to be constantly ready to provide fiscal updates. We're constantly consulting with business and with industry to get a good sense of where our economy is going. That said, we want to make sure that the situation is more stable before we give an outline of a fiscal update. We're in a very fluid situation, and as we have a more stable situation from which to provide economic forecasts, we will come forward with those forecasts, which we think is appropriate.
Thank you, Minister. Julie, follow up.
Mr. Morneau, Julie Van Dusen, CBC. So there was a huge uptake on the CERB, the $2,000 a month benefit, not so much on the wage subsidy. And I'm wondering, as the economy starts to reopen a little bit, is the CERB a disincentive in that some people might rather stay at home? Maybe they're too afraid to go to work, or maybe they're being offered less than the CERB offers, the $2,000 a month.
Julie, this is an important question, and it's something that we're working on. The one correction I'd make is that both programs have had really significant impact. We've had, as you know, more than 7.5 million people that have gone on to the emergency response benefit, but we've also had millions of people through their employers apply through the wage subsidy. So we see both of these programs as very important to support employees and people. And as we move forward, we are, exactly as you said, trying to make sure that there's an incentive for an employer to keep their employees on or to rehire workers as we carefully open up. And at the same time, we want to make sure that there's support for people who are facing the challenge of not being at work. So we're going to work towards this extension of the wage subsidy appropriately, and obviously have to look at how that relates to the emergency response benefit and our employment insurance system. That work's ongoing.
Okay, we are going to pull away from the federal briefing. If you want to keep watching Ministers, you can do that at cbc.ca/politics. It had a lot of technical difficulties, so it was probably good that I cut away at one point to speak with the Brigadier General about the situation in Quebec. But at the end there, you got a sense of the scale of government support that has happened over just the past couple of months. More than $151 billion that has been brought in to bear by the government to try and support both Canadians and the overall economy. I'll bring back Vashi Kapelis and Catherine Cullen for their take on anything that they heard or anything I may have missed while I was doing that interview, Vashi.
No, I actually want to jump off exactly what you just outlined there, Rosie, the sort of magnitude, the quantification of the amount of financial aid and the programs that the government has doled out in, 10 weeks? Not even 10 weeks? Yeah. I was just quickly looking up as soon as Minister Morneau said that, according to the government, over the last 5 years, the government has authorized an average spending of $264.7 billion, while actually spending about $251 billion. So total spending per year on all programs, $250 billion in average over the last 50 years. So we're already at $150 billion just on COVID-19 measures, not to mention whatever else the government has to spend on regular stuff. I think that number is staggering, and to think that we are just really 10 weeks into something we've been told could last to varying degrees, up to 2 years, depending on the development of treatment or a vaccine, gives us a sense of, I think, why so much of the conversation in the past few days, politically at least, has centered around, can you provide us with more information about what you plan to do and how you might address later, much later down the road, this much money, spending this much money, and how you plan to rectify that in the future. Obviously, those aren't easy questions to answer at this point, but those questions, and Minister Morneau got them from journalists as well, and he did get them from the opposition this week, even Liberal MP Wayne Easter at some points, how are you thinking about government spending over the next couple of years, over the next couple of months? You may not be able to tell us exactly, but can you give us a sense of what you're planning? I think are pretty genuine questions. Okay. We'll see if they get an answer.
Okay, and Catherine, over to you, about 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to highlight that this really is a moment of transition that the government is looking at today, Rosemary, right? They're talking about using the wage subsidy as the tool to get Canada moving forward, but I think there are so many questions that neither we nor the government, no one really knows the answer to. Are businesses ready? Are employees ready? And is this the right tool to make that happen? The Prime Minister has talked about making the economy come roaring back. Well, today he acknowledged it's a convoluted process.
Okay, thank you both very much. I had to cut you off there. Vashi Kapelis and Catherine Cullen, thanks for your help with our coverage. I'm Rosemary Barton. We'll have more coverage, of course, coming up on CBC News Network with Andrew Nichols. Have a good weekend, although I'll be here tomorrow, so I'll see you then.